Handwriting instruction. Teaching handwriting is vital to providing a kinesthetic avenue to learning how to read and to spell. It is part of a multisensory approach to teaching reading and spelling. Sadly, in today's schools, many of our schools are no longer teaching students how to form the letters. They allow students to form them however they want, and they feel that because students will be typing so much in the future, that handwriting is no longer important. However, there have been some really fascinating studies in the last year or two coming out of Europe. And one of those studies took adults and they taught them a new alphabet. And one group of adults, they taught how to write that alphabet. And another group of adults, they only taught how to type it. And what they found was that the group who learned how to write the alphabet remembered the sounds and had fewer reversals than the group that only learned to type it. In addition, they did functional MRI studies on these groups. And functional MRI studies track the blood flow and oxygenation in the brain as people are performing different tasks. And what they found is that the group that had learned to write the letters and the phonograms of that alphabet were actually using the sensory motor areas of their brain when they were reading that alphabet, and that the group that had learned to type it were not. The conclusion of the study was that when we learn to write the letters, we are making a sensory motor imprint on the brain of the shapes of the letters. And so this is a kinesthetic, literally a kinesthetic way of learning the shapes rather than needing to rely on sight alone. Now, I want to go through some of the steps for teaching handwriting. And what I want you to notice as we talk about this is that the goal is to develop rhythmic and automatic muscle memory. So good handwriting, and people who have good handwriting have a rhythm to their writing, and it's very automatic. People who struggle with handwriting don't have that level of muscle memory, and they may form letters sometimes differently. They don't have a rhythm as they're writing, and so they write more slowly, and this can create all sorts of other issues. It also can spill into reading. Now, as we begin, I want to talk about where we begin with teaching handwriting. And it might surprise you, but I like to actually begin by teaching cursive. So rather than teaching students who are 5 years old manuscript, I actually like to begin with cursive. Just to be careful, this is not a make it or break it point with the logic of English, but allow me to share with you why I believe cursive is a better place to start. First of all, in cursive, it is difficult to reverse B's and D's and P's and Q's. Cursive really emphasizes the directionality of reading and writing and helps to prevent reversals. In addition, the words are connected in cursive. And so when you are writing a word, you only pick up your pencil between the words. This emphasizes where words begin and end and helps solve that problem where some students blend the end of one word to the beginning of another when they're reading. In addition, you've probably noticed that when students learn manuscript first, those students often put too much space between the letters within a word and too little space between words. And when you teach them cursive, that's not a problem because there's that experience of picking up your pencil between the words and then they're connected. So it solves the spacing issues. In addition, in cursive, all of the lowercase letters begin on the baseline. So we don't have to instruct students about where to place their pencil when they're forming a new letter. This is different from manuscript, where the manuscript letters begin in 8 different places. So when we teach students manuscript, we need to instruct them on where to put their pencil as well. Now, if you take a moment and you write the word teacher in both cursive and in manuscript, I want you to think about which one requires more fine motor skill. Go ahead. Now, you'll notice that when you write in manuscript, your pencil has to keep being picked up to begin the next letter, and it is more fine motor skill intensive. With cursive, it's smoother and it requires less fine motor movement. Now, it's fascinating because what are young children challenged by? That's right, they're challenged in fine motor. So when we ask them to write in manuscript first, we're actually asking them to do what is physically more difficult for them. Cursive was taught first in the United States until the 1940s. This was the time that Dick and Jane and the sight words came into our schools as well. And at that time, we left behind cursive first instruction and began to teach manuscript. Other English-speaking countries then followed the United States and began teaching manuscript from the beginning in the schools. Now, this is not true about other parts of the world in other languages. You'll notice here this is a children's book in French, and it's written in cursive. They even print many of their children's books in cursive to reinforce cursive instruction in the schools. Now, they do teach in other nations cursive at the same time as learning to read bookface, and this hasn't created a lot of problems for their students because they find that the benefits of teaching cursive first far outweigh the negatives. In summary, cursive was designed for the human hand, whereas printing or manuscript was designed for the printing press. One of the questions that many people ask me is, what about the different shapes of the letters between cursive and bookface? And isn't that one of the reasons to really begin with manuscripts so that students don't have this discrepancy? But what you'll notice is a few things. First of all, I have on the screen for you a-a-ah. Notice that the a-a-ah phonogram has two different shapes that are commonly found in the bookface fonts. So already we need to teach our students that this phonogram has two shapes commonly found in books that they will need to read. Then if you compare a-a-ah in cursive to the bookface letters, what you'll notice is that there's really just one stroke that's different, and that's the connector stroke. Here's a G or a G, J. You'll notice the same thing here. There's two ways that we write G, J in a book, but the cursive form is really just like one of them plus a connector stroke. Now, there are a few cursive phonograms that do look different from the manuscript ones. Or from the bookface ones, and this is due to making them easier to write and distinguishing the phonograms from one another. However, the benefits of having something that's simpler with fine motor and easier to write far outweigh these differences in needing to learn a few visual discrepancies between how the letters look. All right, so the goal we mentioned of teaching handwriting is to develop rhythmic and automatic muscle memory. And here's a few ideas on how you can help your students do this. In your teacher's manual on page 65, you will see some samples of directions on how to teach cursive, and then on page 66, manuscript letters. Now, what's important in these directions is to notice, first of all, there are explicit directions. So we always want to give students directions that tell them exactly how the letter is going to be formed. Second, you'll notice that there are bolded instructions. These bolded instructions emphasize the rhythm of how to form that letter. And these are important because they're short, they're snappy, and they allow the student to emphasize the rhythm of handwriting. And the third thing you'll notice is that we also have the sounds there because we want to be teaching the sounds of the phonogram at the same time that we're teaching them how to write them. So learning the phonograms involves learning how to write them and what their sounds are right from the beginning. So let me just give you a little sample of this with some English phonograms, and then I'm going to move on and teach you a few Russian phonograms so that you can experience it more like your student would. When teaching a phonogram, what I like to do is I like to first show them the bookface version. So I say, this says k, s, and have them say the sound after me, k, s. Then I'll say, okay, we're going to learn how to write k, s. And I'll then show them what it will look like in the cursive, or if you're using manuscript, in the manuscript version. And I'll even say, how do these look different? Oh yeah, look, there's a little connector stroke here. And you can explain to students, you know what, this will help you to connect ks to other phonograms when you're writing. And then I will show them explicitly how to write the letter. And you may use a sandpaper letter. You can use a handwriting chart, which I'll demonstrate in a few minutes. You can use a whiteboard, but let's try this with the sandpaper letter. So I'll say, well, all the cursive letters begin on the baseline. So curve up past the midline, roll back around past the baseline. So I gave explicit directions, and I would have the students explain curve up past the midline, roll around past the baseline. K, s. Then I would say, let's learn the short directions. Curve, roll. Notice curve, roll emphasizes the natural stopping points within the phonogram, and so it emphasizes the rhythm of handwriting. So then I would have the student curve, roll, k, s. And this is how we'll introduce how the phonograms are written. You can do the exact same thing in manuscript, just emphasizing the explicit directions, then the rhythmic directions. And in manuscript instruction, you'll also have to add some instruction about how those letters are spaced within words when you get to that point, and then between words. Let's experience multisensory phonogram instruction more like how your student will experience it. I'd like to do this by teaching you 3 Russian phonograms. I've chosen Russian because many English speakers don't know the Russian phonograms, and it'll be a great opportunity for you to experience learning a new letter and its sounds and how to write it simultaneously. So the first phonogram we'll learn is ch. You see it on the screen, so let's say ch together. Now, when we write ch, it will look like this. And notice, this is the cursive version. If I were a student in Russia, I would be learning it in cursive right from the beginning. And I would be learning it simultaneously with book face, which is what I recommend as well. All right, so let's go ahead and learn how to write ch. On page 70 of your teacher's training manual, you have a handwriting chart that looks like this. And I would recommend that you take it out and that you follow along with me in how to write a ch. So we begin writing ch by putting our finger on the midline. Then swing up to the top line, down to the midline, swing up to the top line, drop to the baseline, ch. Let's go ahead. Swing, down, swing, drop, ch. Now notice those were the rhythmic instructions that emphasize the rhythm of the phonogram. Swing, down, swing, drop, ch. Now we can also practice this phonogram by writing it in the air. So let's go ahead and write ch very large. Swing down, swing, drop, ch. Very good. The second phonogram is aw. Go ahead and say aw. Aw, very good. Now when we write aw in cursive, it looks like this. Notice it's the same way in English where we have 2 forms of the aw, or a-aw in English. In Russian, aw also has 2 forms, and this reflects one of the ways that it's written in book face. Often when I'm teaching a student, I'll even show them the multiple ways it can show up in a book face or in a font, so that they are able to recognize them right from the beginning. All right, let's learn how to write aw. And once again, you'll need your handwriting chart. You can form these charts on whiteboards with tape, as I just showed, or you can use them just simply with lines printed on a page. There's lots of ways to go about it, but the key is to develop something where they can use large motions generated from the elbow with their pointer finger to practice and learn how to form the phonogram. So we'll begin again on the baseline. Roll up to the midline. Curve around to the baseline, swing up to the midline, down. And let's do the shortened directions. Curve, roll, swing, down, aw. One more time. Curve, roll, swing, down, aw. Now let's practice ch again. Swing, down, swing, drop, ch. And once again, you could practice writing it in the air. You could do all sorts of texture writing. I enjoy having a salt box or having students writing it in sand or with finger paint to practice the phonogram's large motor and to practice writing them. This third phonogram is actually the most difficult one. So this phonogram says E. Now, you're probably wondering what's so hard about that, E. Well, let me explain. Just like some of your students might be missing some of the speech sounds, this will be a great opportunity for you to understand how to feel how a sound is made, even if you may not quite hear it. So if you take a moment and you say I, and then say E, feel what your mouth is doing when you say I, E. Notice your mouth is in pretty much the same position, except with I, your lips and your cheeks are very lax. And when you say E, your lips and your cheeks are very tense. This is a lax, tense vowel pair in English. Well, in Russian, there is an E sound right between I and E. And they actually have a hard E and a soft E. This is the soft E sound. Now, I can't hear the difference, but I can feel the difference. Can you? E. So this will become a kinesthetic or a visual cue for a kinesthetic action, even if we can't quite hear it. Now, this has huge implications, not just for ESL students, which, by the way, I highly recommend when your students don't know a sound, take a moment, because it's not in their pronunciation, take a moment, show them the phonogram, explain how to form the sound with their mouth, and then show them how to write it. And then when they come across it in texts, they'll have a visual cue for how to form that sound, what their mouths should do to form it. In the same way with young students, for example, if they're missing the TH sound, you can show them the phonogram and then tell them that you make it by sticking out your tongue and blowing. And then they have this visual clue for a kinesthetic action, and slowly that will become incorporated into their speech as well. So back to E. Go ahead and say it with me again and feel that soft E sound, E. This is how we write E. Notice there's some slight differences in how it's formed, and you could compare and contrast them, but you can also see the relationship, I hope, between them. And let's go ahead and learn how to write E in cursive and in Russian. Once again, we'll be using our handwriting chart, and we will start at the baseline, swing up to the midline, down to the baseline, swing up to the midline, down to the baseline. Curve. So it goes swing down, curve, E. Now we could have the students practice writing these, once again using all sorts of sensory materials. You can use sidewalk chalk and go outside and write them really big. You can use window paint. You can have, little kids practicing in the bathtub with bathtub paints, learning just how to write them. It should be really fun for young students. All right, well, you are ready to read your first Russian word. Go ahead and take a moment and try to sound it out for me. Did you get it? It says chai. Now, chai is the Russian word for tea, and it's actually the word for black tea. In Russia, it doesn't refer to the kind of tea with milk and sugar and spices like the Indian chai. However, it does mean tea. And you can see now how you took the phonograms and then were able to begin to blend them together to read words. And it's a very exciting step for our students when they're able to begin to take those phonograms and then combine them and blend them into words. A few tips for you as you're teaching handwriting. First of all, begin large motor skill. Many young students are fine motor skill challenged because developmentally they haven't developed fine motor skills yet. So you can teach writing using movements from the elbow, and they can learn to write these using large motor skill movements. And I don't mean medium where they're stretching their hand. I mean large where they're using their whole arm. Also use all the learning modes. Make sure to explain it so they hear it. Make sure to demonstrate it so they see it. And make sure to give them opportunities to do it so they experience it. Provide explicit directions so there's no room for confusion. And then don't trace. Many of you have probably noticed that most of the handwriting programs out there involve tracing. They're those little dotted lines, and students who learn to write this way are relying on the visual side of learning to write. They're not developing automatic muscle memory. They've shown this through studies because what they've found is that when students are using those little dots, they're connecting them and they're going along very jerkily. And what we want is those fluid handwriting motions so that they have that rhythmic handwriting. The Logic of English handwriting program, the Rhythm of Handwriting, emphasizes muscle memory and rhythm versus just tracing, or we don't use any tracing. Also, for teachers and parents out there, when you have a young student learning to write the A through Z phonograms, don't leave them alone a lot and expect this to be an independent activity. If you invest some time here and teach them how to write the phonograms correctly, you will save countless hours and wasted time of poor handwriting and reversals and all the problems that creep in when we don't instruct handwriting right from the beginning. Use a variety of mediums when practicing handwriting. There's a number of them shown for you on the screen. You can write in shaving cream and in salt. You can use finger paint. You could put tempera paints in a Ziploc bag and let the students write in that squishy sort of mass in there. It's also important when we're practicing and learning phonograms to practice at the various depths of learning. Now, the depths of learning are this. First of all, the easiest thing you can do when learning a phonogram is to be able to recognize it among a number of choices. This would be multiple choice. And I love to play games where, for example, I'll lay out the phonogram cards on the table of the phonograms the student has learned, and I'll say, I want you to slap the correct one, and they'll slap it and grab it. Or you could give them a fly swatter or something else where they have this kind of experience of selecting the right one and make it really fun. Another way I like to do that is with a Nerf gun. I'll write some phonograms on a whiteboard, and then I will read the sounds, and I'll tell the students, you take your Nerf gun and you try to shoot the correct phonogram. And if they have little suction cups on them, they'll even stick on the whiteboard, and kids think it's really fun. So phonogram practice should be fun. And the first depth of learning, as I said, is to choose from multiple choice. The second depth of learning would be to be able to read the phonograms. So in this instance, you would show the students a phonogram and they would read the sounds. You could do this with flashcards where you have a race and they have to see how fast they can read them. There's game ideas in the teacher's training manual and in the Logic of English Phonogram and Spelling Game Book where they could practice balancing on a balance beam at the same time, or all sorts of fun ideas to be moving as you practice reading them. The most difficult thing to do with phonograms, and that demonstrates a level of mastery, is to hear the sounds with no visual clue and then to practice writing them. And so in this instance, you would read a sound to the phonogram, you would read a phonogram sound, and the students would then write it. And you could do this, as I said before, in lots of different mediums or with other games like that we have in our game book. My final tip for handwriting and phonogram instruction for you is to think carefully about the size of lines on the paper that you give your students. Many young students struggle with those giant kindergarten-sized lines. And the reason that they struggle is because their hands are really tiny and then they're trying to stretch to fill those spaces. So if you have a student who has kind of sloppy handwriting when you transition to the pencil, try decreasing the line size. In fact, I recommend in a classroom setting having a variety of sizes of lines available for the students and letting students choose the size that is most comfortable for them for writing. Some 5-year-olds write really neatly, very, very tiny, and that would be appropriate to their hands. And others need larger lines, and that's what they need to write neatly. So this is a great place for some individual preference and to respect the needs of those individual students. So let's review the process for teaching phonograms to students of various ages. If you are teaching a beginning student who's 4 or 5 years old the phonograms, teach 1 phonogram a day. Also, be sure that you are teaching the phonograms and practicing them through play that's child appropriate and that they find engaging and fun. Learning phonograms should be a lot of fun. If you are teaching older students the phonograms, you may teach them more rapidly. I oftentimes will group the phonograms by initial handwriting stroke. So all of the swing phonograms I might teach the first day, all of the roll phonograms another day. With students who are 7, 8, 9 years old and up, I like to spend maybe 1 to 5 days teaching the A through Z phonograms, no more than this. And this should be a time where you're remediating their handwriting, teaching them cursive if they haven't learned cursive before. By the way, with older students who you are remediating, making a switch to cursive can often make a dramatic improvement in their handwriting for their schoolwork as well. I have seen older students who write like 5-year-olds who, when taught cursive, have perfect cursive that's amazingly beautiful, and then when they go back to manuscript they still write like a 5-year-old, and the reason is just I think those motor movements of cursive can be so much easier for them. So with the older students, switch them to cursive, teach them by handwriting stroke, and try to get through the A through Z phonograms as quickly as possible so you can move on to multi-letter phonograms and words.